Welcome to the Inside Elections podcast, where we analyze elections in a nonpartisan, data-driven, and accessible way. In this episode, we'll talk about what happened in the 2024 elections, including the fight for the White House, the Senate, and the House. And we'll do it all with our very special guest, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report with Amy Walter. Buckle up.
I'm Nathan Gonzales, editor and publisher of Inside Elections, which has been providing top-notch nonpartisan news for 40 years now. I just got back last week. I was in Bloomington, Illinois, which is Illinois' 17th district, in San Antonio, which is Texas' 35th district, close to completing my speaking tour for the cycle.
I'm Jacob Rubashkin, deputy editor of Inside Elections, and I just got back from a quick family trip up to New Jersey's 11th district, which is currently represented by a woman that I think we're going to be talking a lot more about over the coming year, and that is, of course, Democrat Mikey Sherrill, who just announced her campaign for governor of New Jersey in 2025.
And we've got a very special guest for what might be the biggest crossover event in history. Make your first appearance on the podcast, Amy Walter of the Cook Political Report. Amy, welcome.
Well, hello, friends. This is like Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman all together in one place. I love it.
I'm not even sure if it's legal. I'm not even sure if this is.
I don't either.
I
don't either. There's probably some sort of FCC.
Nobody tell the new FCC commissioner.
Yeah, exactly. That we
not confirmed yet.
No.
From Chuck Todd to Leah Escarinav to Kirk Beto, we've had a very heavily influenced National Journal hotline on here, which is part of your resume.
Exactly.
You also did a stint at ABC News. People can see you on the News Hour on PBS every Monday. But let's go back in time a little bit and tell us what congressional district you grew up in.
Oh, I'd love to. I grew up in Illinois' 8th district, which is suburban Chicago, northwest suburbs, which had been represented for years and years and years by Phil Crane. My entire growing up, he was our representative, and my parents, who were a Democrat and a Republican, so we had a bipartisan household. They disagreed on everything, and they canceled each other's vote out on pretty much every election except for one, and that was Phil Crane. Neither one of them were big Phil Crane supporters. It's now, I can't believe this, it went when in redistricting, it got shuffled around a bit. It was Pete Roskins for a little bit, and then when Sean Casten won, he was the congressman there. And now, does anybody know where Barrington is? This one is weirder than ever. Mike Quigley.
Mike Quigley.
What?
Wow.
So
Interesting.
The Chicago district winding its way, its little tendril, all the way up to the northwest suburbs.
I didn't know you grew up in Barrington. That's my cousins are in Barrington.
Oh,
so
lovely.
It's a
Do you
small
know
world. Do I know my cousins?
Do I know them?
Yes.
Yeah. Should I
Does
know
Amy?
them?
Does,
I left
does Amy
there
know
like
them? Do you know?
126 years ago, so probably not. But proud Barrington High School graduate. Go Broncos!
Yeah.
So I mean, you talked about your parents canceling out each other. So it sounds like politics was a part of the typical discussion growing up.
No,
or how
it really never was. It's just that they were really very different in terms of political ideology, even though they grew up in the same place and had similar backgrounds. My mom was like your classic working class Catholic JFK voter. My dad was a Ronald Reagan acolyte. And so that's where they, and it even spilled out into her sporting choices, who she cheered for. So we are a White Sox family because they're the blue collar team, and the Cubs, of course, are the bougie team. And so you always had to cheer for the White Sox. My mom did not even cheer for the Cubs when they got into the World Series.
Wow.
You can believe that.
I mean,
She's serious
I
about her
admire the
allegiances.
commitment.
I do too. I do too.
And at what point did you know that what you're doing now existed as a viable occupation?
Never. Is this viable,
TBD.
you guys? Yeah, TBD. So no, there was no such thing. In fact, I first met Charlie Cook in 1998, and he offered me this job in that era. And you know that Stu and Charlie were these fixtures at roll call and had their own newsletters, but it wasn't a thing, right? It was something that was part of the political, really the insider political world. So insidery that if you had to tell somebody who wasn't in Washington what you did, they'd be like, "What? Never heard. What is it that you do?" Now, thanks to the fact that all politics is national, and that certainly the last two presidential or three presidential elections got a lot of people who had never paid attention to politics before into it. I feel like this has become more of a thing that people know about, but it is still, yeah, it is not. The DC is not the same town that it was, Nathan, when we first came up. So all of this feels a lot different.
Well, one of my favorite things to remember about how politics and campaigns have evolved and changed, particularly with technology, is that when I first started doing this with Stu, and we were doing a post-mortem on the Kentucky House race and talk about how well Ann Northup did, that
Yep.
Her consultant sent us the TV ads from the race on a VHS tape after the race was over. Like, which was great. It was basically like Christmas to me, but
Yeah, but we
because
never
that's the only
saw
way you could
any of
get it.
those
And
ads
now we all get email alerts. I mean, I have
immediately.
200,000
Yep.
emails from alerts about every ad
Yep.
instantly from Ad Impact when they come
Yep.
on the air. So things have changed a little bit.
Just a tiny bit. Yeah, we didn't have. Did we? I guess we had the internet. Barely. I think it was still dial up though when I first started. And certainly the idea of ads coming via your email address, that was a long awaited process. But I think the one thing that hasn't changed, you guys, and to me is the most important, is getting to meet with these candidates. Now, we don't get to meet with them for the length of time we used to. There were in the olden days, they used to come in and sit down with us individually for like an hour. That doesn't happen anymore. And more, it's like, you get these sort of speed dating meetings over at the NRCC or the DCCC with these candidates. But I feel like you can learn a lot just by spending, even if it's only 15 minutes with those candidates, right?
Yeah. And almost exclusively those are positive interactions, which is, I think, something that candidates and their teams don't always understand. And they can be fearful almost. And maybe from what I understand, Stu was a fearsome guy, but
I can do an impression.
More bark than
it was
bite.
more, he would sit like this and then he'd go, what? Right?
But I'm always so amazed when campaigns are hesitant to get their candidates FaceTime with us, because it's not like it's going to hurt them. If anything, it's almost always it helps us do our jobs and helps them do their jobs. But that I still haven't quite figured out. But I am curious. Do you remember the first candidate interview you did?
Gosh, that is so good. I don't know that I remember the first candidate interviews that I did, but I do remember many of those candidates. I mean, if I could only remember, I don't know, people in my life, their birthdays and important events in my family's lives the way I remember congressional candidates from the early 2000s, that would be fantastic. Right? It's like, I can't remember this person's name who I've known for 20 years, but I do remember Ann Northup and the Kentucky 3 race. So I think it's more, Jacob, of people that really stood out to me. And it might be that 2000 cycle. This must have been really early on. It was Ronnie Shows from Southern Mississippi back in the days when Democrats used to win in Mississippi. And he was this road commissioner, the Mississippi. I think they had certain constituencies, like the southern region of Mississippi or the southeast region roads commissioner. And he also had a super thick accent, like really, really thick southern accent. I didn't understand a good 65% of what he said, but he talked a lot about 4-lane highways. And then I went directly from that meeting to David Wu, who Nathan would remember from the great state of Oregon,
Yep.
first district. And he was this wonder kid who I think he was going to medical school or something, and then got at Harvard and got bored and dropped out and went to law school and became a software attorney and moved to Portland and was working in tech. And so this, to me, it was like that, that boomeranging between two Democrats, one from a rural southern, pretty poor district, or at least not as economically prosperous as Portland and its suburbs. And, here was David Wu talking about Pacific Rim and trade and internet. And Ronnie Shows was like, we're going to get 4-lane highways so people can get to Jackson and get to their jobs. And it is that stuff. I mean, I'm sure you guys think similarly, but that's what makes this, not only makes a job fun, but it helps you understand America better. When you see these people coming in from these parts of the country and you think, oh, everything's the same. Politics is all nationalized and nothing really matters if it's not, whatever's on cable or the national zeitgeist. But the smaller things matter, which is what I loved about 2024.
Yeah.
Because candidates did matter and campaigns did matter, and the marginal stuff was the whole ballgame.
Yeah. Well, let's jump right in, and I appreciate you coming on because not only I think we both agree we are the benefactors of two great folks, Charlie and Stu, who have paved the way for us. Now we're trying to navigate this political prognosticating thing, and we all put our projections out there for everyone to see and digest and criticize, and now we have results, and so we can all go through it. We can all go through this
together. Yes,
together.
We can hold hands in whatever sort of metaphorical way we need to do that.
Everyone should be prepared that we actually did pretty good, all of us collectively. Let's start with the presidential race, and actually let's do here's a clip of Trump from his victory speech early Wednesday morning of November 6th.
And in addition to having won the battleground states of North Carolina, I love these places, Georgia, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin, we are now winning in Michigan, Arizona, Nevada, and Alaska, which would result in us carrying at least 315 electoral votes.
So, Amy, anyone who is reading the Cook Political Report or Inside Elections should not have been surprised by a Trump victory this time. So it was different than 2016. But what was a surprise to you in the presidential outcome?
You know what the number one surprise to me was, looking at in the exit polls and in some polling that was done post-election, the people who said they decided in the last week of the election. and how they broke. Now, again, growing up in this business 20, 30 years ago, if you had the last week of a campaign that Donald Trump had, which was really just all about controversy. And if you were watching any sort of traditional media, all you would have heard about Trump, that is, on the last week of the campaign was the floating island of garbage situation from the Madison Square Garden rally, talking to Tucker Carlson and musing about Liz Cheney and whether or not, how you wanted to interpret it, whether or not he was suggesting she face a firing squad or suggesting that she get onto the field of battle. And then going off on kind of a random set of tangents in one of his final rallies in Pennsylvania. All of it was just sort of typical Trump, where it was a lot about the controversy, not a lot about his message, which, that's what he was winning on, was talking about the economy. And so I would have said, well, gosh, he's closing really weak. That is going to hurt him among those people who are deciding late. And instead, those late deciders broke overwhelmingly to Trump, which told me two things. One, it's something we have long known and we all talked about a lot during this campaign, but our diffused media environment means that, our definition of what a good closing is, or what the traditional media says is a good or a bad week, is not as important as we think it is, because people are getting their information from all kinds of sources. The second is, it really came down to something that someone had said earlier to me about what this race was essentially about, and that is, it was less about Donald Trump and people's worries about him, and much more about concerns about who Kamala Harris was. In other words, people hearing more about Donald Trump and controversy wasn't new. It's something they already had sort of priced into their opinions of Donald Trump. What they really wanted in those last couple of weeks, my sense is, was that they would get from Kamala Harris a reason to vote for her, because she made a consistent or conscientious break from Biden, or she was in some way able to answer their concerns about whether she was going to be able to do the thing that they wanted, which I think for those late deciders is most likely an economic sort of driven concern.
Yes. How do you square that, though, with the kind of the stunning increase in Harris's image that we saw kind of after she became the presidential nominee, which is not something we typically see in American politics, that kind of massive change in a short period of time in someone's favorability? Because it seems like by election day, Americans actually liked Harris more than they liked Trump, but they still voted for Trump. And I guess, does that say something about, the psyche of the American voter, or that they're willing to vote for someone that they don't like because they think that they're different, or they'll be able to do a better job? I mean, it's that's kind of the thing that I'm struggling to figure out is
Yeah.
is that Trump was not popular. He may have been more popular than he was in 2020 or 2021, but Harris was still better liked than him, and yet that still wasn't enough. And it touches on something that you wrote in your post-election article about kind of change being the status quo now, and American voters are just kind of primed to wipe the slate clean every 4 years, regardless of how they feel about the candidates themselves, it seems
Yeah.
like.
Well, I guess let me go to the first part, which you're right. That to me was one of the striking numbers to come out of the 2024 election, was how not just that Harris became more popular from the time she was vice president to the time she was the nominee, right? So as vice president, she's as unpopular as Biden. Almost the minute that she becomes the standard bearer for the Democratic Party, her favorable rating goes up 15 points. Now, as I see it, though, Jacob, when we got into basically, let's call it late September into October, I think that Trump and Republicans effectively took a lot of that shine off of her. And that when I look at the exit polls, which we can have a whole conversation about how accurate they really are, but she's seen a little bit more favorably than Trump, but not a whole lot more favorably. I mean, she was still underwater, especially in some of those key swing states. Maybe, she's -3 and he's -5, so it's not as significant. So I do think she did get a boost, like almost like rocket fuel coming into the race. But over time, I think the Trump campaign effectively, diminished some of it by its attacks on her. And then some of it was also diminished by the fact that, there wasn't something, she was brand new and interesting and memeable in those first couple of weeks and that first month after Biden drops out. And then she goes and has a really strong debate performance. But after that debate, like there was not a lot of there for her in terms of redefining herself as change. It really turned much more into let's just not elect Donald Trump because he's dangerous. And so that's my feeling on that. And as for we just keep changing from year to year who we vote for. Don't you guys think so much of it, though? It's less that voters are actually changing their mind year to year. It's that if you've got an electorate that's 49-49 and polarized, that every election then just becomes all about which polarized group turns out and which polarized group sits home.
Yeah.
And this is why I'm desperate for the voter files to get updated and to see what really happened, because we're getting a lot of chatter here about, the movement among all these different groups, right? Young people are suddenly Republican and old people are Democrats and right, all of this. It's like a lot of young people stayed home.
Yeah.
A lot of Latinos stayed home. Now, a lot of the people who stayed home in 2020 showed up to vote for Donald Trump, right? That we mistake movement sometimes for actual individuals moving rather than just new people coming in and other people staying out of the electorate. But I just think for Harris, her challenge to me was always that she had to toe this line of being a candidate of change. She was turning the page, all of that. And yet it was pretty obvious that there wasn't much that she was saying she was going to change. And it's like, I'm not Joe Biden, right? Every answer to that question was, how are you different from Biden? Well, I'm not him.
Yeah.
Well, okay, thanks. That's pretty obvious, unless this is a secret Scooby-Doo surprise. And that underneath the mask, it really is Biden. But, there was if you were a young voter, and to me, it also follows the memification. And I think about this a lot, especially for all the conversation about like young voters and where they get their information. Over the summer, we had a young person living with us who was interning for the summer in DC. And so she was there when Biden dropped out, and she and her friends were talking about the coconut meme. And I was like, I do not understand this coconut meme. Can you explain it to me? Can you show it to me? So, because I don't have TikTok. So she showed me the coconut meme. And I was like, I don't really get it. Because are you making fun of her? Or is this a good thing? I don't understand. They're like, exactly. But remember, she was like this big, everybody was doing the coconut and the memeing and the hilarious. And you could feel all that energy there. And then it just kind of died out, right?
Yeah.
There was no other memeing to do.
Yeah.
Trump, because I live with a young Gen Z male who happens to be my son, and I get to see his media feeds. And those organic Trump memes, they never went away, right? I mean, he has followers. It's not just that they are supportive of him, but like they are building entire channels
Yeah.
through Discord and Reddit and all of the places where younger men hang out. And so the authenticity piece, I think was a real factor for Harris. And that to your point about how she got favorable or unfavorable.
Yeah. And there's been so much conversation about like, oh, do Democrats need their own Joe Rogan, right? Democrats need, what are Democrats going to do to create the mirror eco when it misses the whole point, which is that people didn't see
Exactly.
Rogan as political. People don't see like a Theo Von
Exactly.
right? The whole point of those voices' power is that they're not seen as political, and so when they gravitated toward Trump, it was much more genuine, it was perceived as much more genuine than Air America 2.0, which is what we might get if a billionaire decides that they want to throw a lot of money at a liberal podcaster to try and create that on the left, which I don't think is going to work out.
That's right. I mean, Barack Obama created the whole ecosystem of young people. Remember, before we knew what a meme was, there were all of those Barack Obama. Remember, all the people were making songs and Facebook, whatever it was at the time that we would do online or watch online. It was the Obama culture that was doing that, not because they invented it. They said, oh, let's have an ecosystem that's going to support our candidate. Was that the candidate himself became the vehicle for creating this fan base. And then the fan base became the Democratic Party, which became Pod Save America, which became all those other things. And you can't just create it and expect that voters are going to follow it. They have to believe in the candidate.
Right. And Trump continues to benefit from the perception that he is an outsider. He's a businessman. Right. He's a celebrity. And I think we constantly have to bring that up as a factor in this, because people have such a low view of politicians and government that because he's perceived as not a politician, he gets the benefit of the doubt and is held to a completely different standard that is arguably much lower than any other candidate is held to. And that's it's not necessarily a fair reality, but I think that is the
100% agree
reality.
And that's why I think that whatever comes next after Trump is going to be more difficult for Republicans, simply because Trump had accumulated 30, 40 years of cultural capital that he continues to cash in on. It's a little bit different now, but I mean, you talk to voters and they like that he's a businessman. They like that he, even if the business that he created was more show than reality, the perception of him as this world conquering real estate developer, larger than life personality, everybody's idea of a rich man, I think has continued to benefit him, even as he's been the center of American politics for the last 8 years.
Yep.
Amy, in your post-election wrap, you talked about headline, "Don't blame the polls," which I think, like me and Jacob, in any speech you've given over the last 8 years probably includes a question about polling. And I was kind of hoping that those would go away over the next 2 years, and I'm not sure that they do, although this was not a terrible cycle for polling.
It was not.
Let me ask this though. The overperformance by Trump, to me, a surprise, was the overperformance in some Democratic states, Maryland, New York, New Jersey, Illinois, whatever it might be. Do you think, and I would credit that to a lack of polling rather than
100%,
a misreading of the polls. But my question to you is, how much faith do you have, if we had a dozen high quality polls in Illinois or New Jersey, that those would have picked up it would have accurately reflected Trump's support?
Mm, fair. It might not have gotten it, especially in a place like New Jersey, down to 4 points. But, and this is why I think, again, what we all do is so important, that we aren't just looking at presidential, but you all were seeing the same data and the same polling we were in House races and in Senate races in some of the states that were not the battlegrounds. So, for the, I don't know how many months it was, you guys saw what was happening on Long Island, that, these were supposed to be districts that Democrats should clean up on, whether it's especially the 4th district, which, what did Biden win it by 12 or something?
14,
in
yeah.
14. And we saw throughout the fall that Harris's numbers were nowhere near that. And so you saw that there. You saw it in New York 17. You saw it in California 22. You saw it again in the individual House races where Harris was in those battleground districts was significantly lower than where Biden had been in 2020. And so that told you that, boy, this is not going to be a 2020 number for Harris, even in these dark blue states. Now, I do think, and this to me is the other, so in that sense, the polls were right? Because if all you knew, and sometimes it's a little awkward because, as you know, it's sort of which is it the tail wagging the dog, right? The congressional races that were competitive maybe told a different story than the state as a whole, because those voters were more engaged than voters in other parts of the state that weren't. I mean, the one place that really kind of went awry, it seems, obviously, was Iowa. And that, though, really was about process and Ann Selzer's specific decisions on how she weights, or more likely does, or more accurately does not weight on education than anything else. But as I said, that's why I wasn't as surprised at the underperformance in those blue states, because we'd been seeing it in New York and California. I do think the other factor that may be a part of the reason for this underperformance is it's kind of all of our faults. And I don't mean the three of us, but just the political.
Is this an ambush?
It is an ambush. I'm putting you guys on alert. But just like, so all of us, and especially the big political media, right? Like TV, et cetera, had been telling voters for the last year that only 7 states matter, right? It's all about Pennsylvania. It's all about, we don't care about Ohio anymore. We don't care about all these other states. All we care about is Pennsylvania and Michigan and maybe Nevada. So, of course, if you're in Illinois, like, why should I go vote? You've been telling me for a year that who cares? I could stay home. And it also said to me a lot about, and I feel it now as well, is this idea of the resistance, right? That for all these months, years, there had been a really hardcore resistance movement in suburban America, especially in places where you have highly educated voters. So to see Loudoun County and Fairfax County, we were just talking about this today over here, even Arlington County, Virginia, like probably the highest per capita in terms of bachelor law degrees, whatever. Trump did better in Arlington than he did in 2020. Harris did, or you can say Harris underperformed Biden.
Yeah.
So there was a certain amount of exhaustion, I think, about Trump, and that reflected itself in those blue states. That resistance turned into more of a throwing up of hands, like, I don't like it, but it doesn't really matter. So, because she's not that great either. So, whatever.
Now, in the Senate, well, in some casual conversations over the last 2 weeks, I admit I'm getting a little frustrated because there's a sense of, oh, here we go again. It's all a surprise. So actually, particularly with the Senate, we have been saying this for
How
forever,
long?
right? That this
Yeah,
was the most certain. A Republican majority in the Senate was the most certain piece of the electoral puzzle. Republicans gained. It looks like it'll be +4 as long as Pennsylvania, holds after these last provisional ballots are counted, and that's what we both been saying.
exactly.
So I was there to us. I think Pennsylvania. Let me try it this way. What do you all do, Amy? How do you approach a race, any race, where the two parties disagree? And for those people who are listening that are more casual listeners, it's actually most races, both parties agree on the
Yes,
general structure of the race, but there are some exceptions. In Pennsylvania, it was on the margins, but there was a fundamental disagreement on who had the advantage in the race.
that's
So I
right.
know whether it's with regard to the Pennsylvania Senate race or just broadly, how do you approach when you're hearing from trusted sources, on both sides that view a race differently? Texas Senate race might be a good one
That's right.
as well.
That's right. At the end of the day, you just have to and sort of trust your own instincts in some cases and the other information that you're getting that goes beyond the parties, right? And so I think Jessica Taylor, who does our Senate stuff here, getting a big push from Democrats. I'm sure you guys were too about Texas, right? This thing, look how close it is. Look at the public polling. Look at our own polling. We're within the margin. But what we also know is that while the state itself can be, I was expecting the margin to be a little bit closer, right? It goes to your point, Nathan, about how, even if they were directionally correct, the margins were a little bit bigger than we thought. So of where the polls were, but that getting from 46 or 47% in Texas to 50 as a Democrat is a heck of a lot harder than getting from 46, 47 as a Republican to 50 in Pennsylvania. And, you can just sort of see a pathway. For McCormick, it really was being able to fly, not just fly within Trump's jet stream, but it seems like where he benefited was he was probably the strongest challenger that Casey had seen in his time as senator, and that what kept Casey from becoming a victim of the movement of the state of Pennsylvania right a little bit over the last few years is that he was able to run in good Democratic years. And so I think perhaps, this is my feeling, I'm curious your take, but in Washington, the name Casey, we say, well, that in and of itself is at least 2 or 3 points that a fill in the blank generic Democrat wouldn't get. And that's going to give him sort of a superpower, even in a bad year, even in places where Democrats have been losing ground. But at the end of the day, I think the name is not as critical as it once was, or not as influential as it was. And that what hurt him more was the fact that he was sort of part of the establishment. He'd been in Washington for a long time. He'd been an incumbent for a long time. And it sort of wasn't paying off for voters. Like McCormick was able to make the case more effectively than any other Republican had made against Casey before, that his tenure in the Senate wasn't bringing anything to them. that what you would
Yeah,
agree
I
or
think
disagree?
I'm going to make a comparison live on a recorded podcast. It's always dangerous to articulate these things right at the bat, but I'm making comparisons to Hillary Clinton in 2016. That Democrats would say she is the most accomplished candidate to ever run for president. They were talking about Senate, Secretary of State, and run through the list, but it was all accomplishments or longevity in something that voters didn't particularly value, which
Yeah,
was government,
that's fair.
right? And
That's fair.
Casey, yes, he's been serving a long time in government, and voters don't think government is really connected to their life or helping them in a way. And so it
Right.
probably became more of a liability where it was an asset in previous cycles.
Yeah, great point.
And Casey did worse than Harris, which was surprising to me. Now McCormick also did worse than Trump, but I think that in most of the other kind of battleground Senate races, the Senate Democrats were outrunning the top of the ticket. I think Michigan might be the only other one, and of course Slotkin won, but where she received fewer raw votes than Harris. But Gallego, I believe Tammy Baldwin, certainly Sherrod Brown, John Tester, all outperforming Harris, and yet Casey, got fewer overall votes than her. If Casey had gotten the same number of votes as Kamala Harris, he would have won. And specifically, if you look at, like, I remember I crunched the numbers in the 7th district, Susan Wild, which Republicans flipped, and Wild did the best of any Democrat in that seat, and then Harris, and then Casey. Casey did worse than both the House incumbent House Democrat and Kamala Harris in that district, and so it's I think that explains a bit of why he lost. That he couldn't even keep pace with the top of the ticket.
You know what's interesting, though, Jacob, that I noticed, and I haven't gone back to the final numbers, but like just in the battleground states, I'm not counting Montana or Ohio, so I'm going to put those to the side. Only Gallego got more raw votes than Harris did. And to me, the more fascinating piece of the Senate was the fact that had those Republicans hit Trump numbers, none of those Democrats would have won.
Yeah.
And I think for like Michigan, Rogers was like, I don't know how many votes, 50,000. I mean, it was a significant number. It wasn't an insignificant number of votes. And that gets me to this question of like, okay, I get there's drop off, right? That just happens. A whole bunch of people go in and they vote for Kamala Harris, they vote for Donald Trump, and they walk out because that was their only thing bringing them to the polls. But it also seems to me to suggest that this whole idea of Trump bringing in new voters, low propensity voters, while it was super important for Donald Trump getting elected, it didn't matter for down ballot Republicans, whether for the House or for the Senate. Which tells you a lot about the Trump coalition, right? Which is, they're going to show up for him.
Yeah.
I don't care about some dude running for the Senate, right?
I think that's you calling it the Trump coalition is maybe the most accurate than a reforming of the Republican Party coalition.
That's right.
Like let's see what it looks like over the next couple of cycles. I want to get to the House because this was a particularly, I think, strong point for both Inside Elections and the Cook Political Report with regard to ratings, with some uncertainty at the top and Trump's margins. The House was basically status quo. There's still a handful of uncalled races. It looks like it'll either be no net change or Democrats +1, which falls into both of our pre-election ranges. Let's listen to a clip from NRCC Chairman Richard Hudson of North Carolina taking a victory lap of sort, even with a status quo result.
That's why voters delivered House Republicans a majority and sent Donald Trump to the White House in a landslide. I'm proud to have led the NRCC to achieve this victory. Even after Democrats spent $550 million spreading lies about House Republicans, we went on offense. Flip seats from Pennsylvania to Michigan to Colorado and beyond. The American people saw through the Democrat lies because Republicans had better candidates and a better message about what we would do to improve their daily lives.
So, Amy, you were the former House editor of the Cook Report. This is deep in your bones. What did you think about these House results?
Always a House homer, will always be. You know what? I'm curious what you all think about this, but throughout this cycle, both Democrats and Republicans that I would talk to, especially those who aren't deep in the weeds in the House, all right, would say, well, Democrats are going to win the House, right? I mean, Democrats are going to win. Democrats are going to win. Democrats are going to win. And I was always like, I don't understand why you're saying that.
Right. We weren't
I really,
you weren't
really
saying
don't.
that. We weren't saying
I know
Dave and
it.
Aaron weren't saying that.
No one. And then I was reading in the week leading up all of the publications on the Hill, so the Punch Bowls and the Politicos. Oh, the vibes are with the House Dems. The House Dems are going to take the majority. And I was like, can you all explain to me beyond vibes why this is going to happen? And so I think it was really that. And it is just a shout out. Some of it is patting ourselves on our back, but also patting you guys on the back to understanding the House is a trickier beast than it seems. And that, yes, the top of the ticket has a tremendous influence. But look, we saw in 2020 that Biden wins, Democrats lose seats in the House. Of course, they still held on to the majority. In this case, Trump wins big, technically, by winning both the popular vote and the Electoral College, and maybe they net one seat. So I think a couple of things are happening. One, we have a pretty well sorted House. What are we going to have, you guys? 15 crossover districts? Something like that?
Yeah.
Maybe?
I mean, the list of Republican Harris districts, that's going to be very, very small.
Right.
There are a lot. I mean, Nellie Poe,
Yeah.
in New Jersey 9. I think there are going to be a lot of Democratic Trump districts, but still,
right. But still not
historically low.
that many.
Not a lot.
Historically low. So that's already, the reality that no matter how good or bad a year is for the incumbent party, as long as you're in a safe enough seat, which most members now are in safe enough seats, moving, or maybe a better way to say this is, basically the overall national vote at the end of the day will have shifted 5 or 6 points, right, to the right. Most Democratic incumbents can survive a shift of 5 to 6 points to the right. There was a time when there were a lot of Democrats who wouldn't have survived that. But those people are all gone. And same thing if there's a shift 5 to 6 points to the left. Most Republicans are going to be able to survive that. It is going to take a, 15-point shift or a 10-point shift to really get into the kinds of numbers that, Nathan, you and I were used to, back in the early 2000s of, 40 seats, 30 seats, 63 seats.
Yeah.
Right? You're just not going to get to that now. So I do think, though, okay, now let's go to 2026. You got a 3-seat margin. You're the party in power.
Yeah.
Do we give Democrats a benefit of the doubt and flipping? I mean, it's too early, obviously.
Well,
but,
I think history says yes. I mean, history says Democrats
yes.
are, they haven't even, the new leadership of the DCCC is probably not even decided. They're already going to hate us for setting expectations.
I know, right? Like, you don't know. But if I think about all of the, Mike Lawler's seat and the California seats that Democrats got close but didn't knock off this year, it's going to be a lot harder for Republicans to win next year, right?
Right.
Yeah. And Amy, I want to go back to something you said about kind of the sorting and the decrease in kind of variance that most House Democrats and Republicans can survive a 5 or 6 point shift one way or the other. I mean, one of the things I was really surprised by, or maybe not surprised by, but I think really illustrates this is, two of the biggest swings in the popular vote in 2024 were in Texas and Florida, which are two of the biggest states in, I think, the second and third largest states in the union at this point. They've got Texas has 38 districts, Florida has 28, so that's what 66 congressional districts. And the popular vote in both of those states swung double digits, right? I mean, Trump won Texas by what 15, 16, something like that. He won Florida by a similar margin. Texas was a 5-point race in 2020. Florida was a 3-point race. Big swings. No change in the House. Those Republican gerrymanders did their jobs too well.
They did.
If they had been a little bit more adventurous in 2021, Republicans could have picked up, I don't know, probably at least 2 seats in Florida and maybe a couple in Texas.
Oh, that's interesting.
They locked in, though. I mean, same New Jersey, there are fewer seats, but like New Jersey swung 13 points to the right. Republicans came close to picking up another seat, but didn't quite. Illinois, no change. They weren't able to. It's even in the places where the shifts were so dramatic.
Yeah. Although I would say, again, this goes back to why I think the resource that you provide and that the Cook Political Report provides is invaluable, but that in places that actually had races that were competitive and engaged, the shift was not as dramatic, right?
Yeah.
So campaigns mattered. So Iowa, the fact that, how much did it shift? 6 points to the right, maybe?
Yeah.
Is that right? It went from whatever. But let's call it 6 points to the right. You still have, Iowa won, where it's coming down to, once again, a handful of votes. So, and in Michigan, the numbers would tell you that Democrats should have lost both of those Michigan open seats, but they didn't because of the candidate quality. So I think it's both, the wave elections of yore were a combination of a national vote shift, like you're saying, Jacob, and then and candidates not paying attention, right? Because they never thought it would impact them, because everybody knows me. They would never vote against me. I'm the most popular person in these regions. But also because I think you just did not have the intensity and the money spent on House races, especially these individual House races that you do now, that you can fight a certain amount of the swing. Now, it wasn't enough for Susan Wild. It wasn't enough for Matt Cartwright, but it was for Jared Golden.
Yeah.
So it's, but that, to me, to go back to that first point, that whole the vibes are with Democrats are going to win.
I literally asked Jacob, who is saying
that all the time.
Every 2 weeks, Nathan would call me up and he would say, "Why are people saying Democrats are going to take back the House?"
I literally I said that every day to Aaron. I was like, we need to keep doing these, just level set pieces of you guys, why are you saying this? They could win. Sure. I'm not saying they can't win. What I'm telling you is it's not a given. Yeah. And the last time the House flipped in a presidential year was when Eisenhower was president. So, beyond the fact that we knew what the playing field looked like, just historically, we haven't seen that kind of shift before. So I don't know, man. I guess people want to believe what they want to believe. I get it. But this is why you need to subscribe to Inside Elections and to the Cook Political Report, because you would have known this and you could have updated your members and said, don't be so quick to assume these things.
Yeah.
But there we go.
And people might be surprised why this episode even exists. Because aren't you guys competitors and you hate each other? No, we're friends.
No, they're friends, and this is how it all works.
Following Amy.
That's right.
Following Amy on Twitter, Jessica Taylor, Dave Wasserman, Aaron Covey, Matt Klein, the whole Cook team. We have high respect for you all, and
right
grateful that
back
you
at
all
you.
are friends. So
right back at you.
Now it's time for our final segment, Look What I Found. This is anything we've stumbled across in the past week that's interesting to us. It doesn't have to be political, it can be a TV show, an album, or something else entirely. You never know what you're going to get. I'll kick us off here. I finally watched the 1997 movie LA Confidential, directed by Curtis Hanson, starring Russell Crowe, Kevin Spacey, and Guy Pearce, who I think is probably the most handsome man in that movie ever to be on film. As well, Kim Basinger, Danny DeVito, David Strathairn, and it was so good. I can't believe I had not seen it before. It is pretty violent, which maybe is why my parents never showed it to me. But it's just I love noir. I love neo noir. It's just a really great kind of sleazy, grimy LA crime story set in the 1950s. That was a nice way to spend a Saturday evening.
Well, that reminds me, why not to show it to my kids? Now, I did subject my boys to, this isn't what I found, but subject them to 2004's National Treasure, Nicolas Cage stealing the Declaration of Independence.
Showed them, revealed to them.
Yeah, no, it was great. It was great. It holds up. They liked it. It was not in the same vein as LA Confidential. I think it was more age appropriate. But I found this weekend on Saturday, I attended the DC punk rock flea market. This was at St. Stephen in the Incarnation Episcopal Church in Columbia. I think it was Columbia Heights. And nothing says punk like showing up in a Honda Odyssey with your 4 kids, and that's what we did. And it was great. You know, they had some vinyl, some band shirts, vintage clothes, jewelry. You know, there was a table for the Democratic Socialists of America. You know, I kind of checked a lot of boxes for what I thought it was going to be. And I don't know, my kids, I don't even know what they thought. And they actually bought some Pokemon cards, which I'm grateful for the punk person who decided to sell Pokemon at the flea market. But it was an experience. I do want to go back. Maybe I'll make this a tradition, but the DC punk rock flea market, I was a fan.
Okay, this isn't. Oh,
go ahead. Yeah, Amy, what did you? Anything?
Should I jump in? Well, this isn't new, but this felt somewhat new. So if you have not ever watched Washington's own women's professional soccer team, the Washington Spirit, they play at Audi Field, which I think is one of the best soccer stadiums in the country. It's a beautiful new soccer specific stadium. And their semifinal game, this is to go into the championship game, was held Saturday afternoon. The place was sold out, 20,000 people. The energy there was unlike I ever experienced at any sporting event in Washington, D.C. It was intense. It was an amazing game. It came down to penalty kicks after 2 overtime. And literally the place was, I was buzzing I think the whole place was buzzing for hours afterward. Even the players interviewed afterwards said, they played, all over the world. Many of them have played on the Olympic team and the World Cup team. And they were like, it was so loud and so crazy. I couldn't even hear anything. It was amazing. So if you are not a soccer ticket holder, well, the season's over, so you can't go there anymore. But
next year,
if you want to go somewhere next year, this place, it's super, super fun. Yeah. Really great energy. And even during the normal season, really fun, great for kids. You know that you're at a women's soccer game because 1, they're held mostly in the early afternoon, but 2, the line for Dippin' Dots is 10 times longer than the line for beer. So that tells you the personnel who show up. Lots of kids.
And are the Spirit favored to win? It's at
well,
Kansas
this
City?
is, I don't know, man. It's against Orlando. Okay. They have a very, very, I think they may be undefeated. So
only got to win one.
They are, what?
We only have to win one, right?
You only have to win one. We are a scrappy team, which is what I loved about us. So Saturday, 8 p.m. championship. can't remember, maybe CBS, ABC, don't know, one of those channels. You can find it. Really, really, really fun.
Yeah. Spirit games are so fun. It's such a great field. The team is electric.
Yeah.
And everyone's always just having such a great time. I don't know.
Everybody's in a great mood. There aren't fights. There aren't, as I said, like when the Dippin' Dot line, that gets a little tense. But you don't have a lot of drunk fans punching each other, so that's nice too.
And it feels like a great combination, both for the elevation of women's sports over the last number of years, but also DC. There's so many people from everywhere, but no one is bringing an allegiance to a women's soccer team, like to the city, right? Like this is a team that everyone can get behind. You can root for whatever football team you want to,
whatever.
But we can all agree, we want the Spirit to win. So
and you get to watch individual national team players because they do split them up between the different teams. So, if your favorite national team player is, Rose Lavelle, well, we beat her, plays for the New York team. Dead. So you get both of those things, right? You cheer for your own team, and then you also get to see, Alex Morgan, or whoever else is, one of your favorite national team players. So that part is also super fun.
Yeah. Somebody tell Nate Silver, DC's got a great sports scene.
See, it was 20,000 screaming fans. Yeah. Come on, that's good.
Exactly. Well, Amy, thank you so much. You've been generous with your time.
That was really fun.
This is a privilege, and get ready for the next cycle, right?
Oh my God, that was me collapsing. That was the sound of me collapsing into myself. All right, talk to you guys later.
At Inside Elections, we provide nonpartisan analysis of congressional, presidential, and gubernatorial races. With a combination of reporting and data, we break down the key races and bring valuable context to complex elections. Go to InsideElections.com to subscribe to the bi-weekly newsletter. We've got individual subscriptions and group packages that are tailored for association and corporate PACs. If you liked this episode, please subscribe to the podcast and rate us on your favorite platform. If you're watching on YouTube, hit the thumbs up button and leave a comment. If you didn't like today's episode, please email Ronnie Schaus. We also wanted to thank our producers, Alan Tuzinski and Melissa Lenner of Pretty Easy Podcasts, and associate producer, Conrad Tolosa. Please come back and join us next time.